Welcome. I'm James Calicut, Waterfowl and Upland Game Bird Extension Specialist.
I'm Mark McConnell, Assistant Professor of Upland Birds at Mississippi State University.
Dr. Brian Davis, Professor, Waterfowl and Wetlands Conservation.
The three of us are all biologists and hunters. Join us for discussions about game bird conservation and management and the science behind it. Of course, we'll also have conversations about bird dogs and bird hunting as well. This is Game Bird University.
All right, welcome, fellas. We got a full house today. It's the first time we've had four folks on, but hopefully we can get through this without folks talking over each other. I'm looking at you, Mark.
Shut up.
I guess to say I'm looking at you, I'm not, because you still haven't figured out how this thing works, and you're not on video again for the second episode in a row. But
I want our listeners to know that the person who purchased my camera, who hosts this podcast, must have gotten me a bad one.
Well,
like sabotage over here.
Could be. Not gonna say I would do something like that, but I'm not gonna say I wouldn't.
With you not in the picture, yours looks a lot better. We can all agree on that.
Well, anyway, today's episode I thought would be really good since we got duck season coming up. Probably by the time this airs, it'll be maybe right after everybody's had their first weekend, and which I hope is positive, but who knows the way things look right now. But thought we'd talk about what makes for a good duck season. And so I got folks together that are really passionate about waterfowl hunting and kind of tackle this from both sides. One, I'm sure, as one of our guests, BC, would say, you got me and Houston on, and we're duck nerds, so we can't help but talk a little bit about the biology side of it. But we want to talk about it just from a hunting standpoint too. What makes personally for us, a good duck season, and how that's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But first, I'll welcome our guest. Houston Havens has returned with us, Waterfowl Coordinator with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Houston, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Thanks for taking time the day before Thanksgiving to come do this. And then our other guest is BC Rogers. He is the owner of Wren and Avid, a great Mississippi-based company that makes some pretty stellar sporting and travel gear, and he is a very passionate conservationist and waterfowler. BC hunts like I think the rest of us probably would like to. He spends a lot of days in the field. And so welcome, BC. Glad to have you.
Thanks, James. And happy Duckmas Eve to everyone here in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's strange that it's a Wednesday. I wish it weren't. Opening on Thursday on Thanksgiving Day is a tough sell, but we got lucky because Miss Kim and Wren, my daughter, went to New York for the Macy's Day Parade. So it's going to be my dad, myself, and Ivy at the camp for opening weekend, which is kind of going to be sort of great too.
Yeah. So definitely, if it was going to have to happen on Thanksgiving Day, what better way to have that situation roll out for you?
Couldn't agree more. That also want to apologize in advance to your listeners. You and I have so many inside jokes. I was thinking about this. We go like, man, I can't say any of that. Not that it's bad. It's just no one would get it.
Yeah.
But I'm
James used to nobody getting his jokes.
That's one of them. Yeah.
Man. Well, let's. I guess with that, we'll get started. So BC brought up. He's got his setup this weekend or this week. I keep wanting to say weekend, but we'll bring that up with Houston later.
I bet Houston hadn't heard anything about that since they.
No. No one said anything to him.
No
about
one
that.
mentioned that to him. No, for sure I have.
Well, you got a whole family event planned. That's a huge part about what to some of us what makes a great duck season is how that time is spent more so than say the harvest, and for some people it is still the harvest. So we'll get into a lot of that side of things. But guess we can talk a little bit about, first off, get the biology out of the way, get the duck nerd stuff out of the way, and then we can hammer into to the real meat of this conversation and have some fun with it and talk about what sport we love really means to us. But so Houston, let's just real quick talk about the things that we look to as a biologist to kind of prepare hunters for, what the season's going to look like. That obviously weather is a huge play into it, but, habitat availability and all those things are a big part of how many ducks we have and their distribution on the landscape and their availability to harvest.
Yeah, so I would say it kind of gets kicked off in the summer every year, right? When the breeding population report comes out, that's kind of the first thing that biologists and duck hunters alike look to, just to kind of see where we are, with mid-continent mallards in particular, but with a lot of the species that we hunt, just seeing what are those populations like going into, the brood rearing season, the rest of the summer and hopefully the fall flight that will be eventually making its way to Mississippi. And so those numbers get reported across a lot of media. Duck hunters start to get talking about it, and that's kind of the first start of it. But within that, there's the big number that everybody looks at. Okay, total ducks is up 5% or down 7%, and that gets talked about a lot. But you and I, as biologists, we look a little deeper into that and into those reports and look at the kind of the sub-regions that are broken down where those surveys occur. And what we're looking for is, okay, what are the areas that we know are important to Mississippi ducks that are coming here, and we know that from band returns. How are the populations doing in those areas, and how do those compare to long-term? Because that can be a big difference, right? Southern Saskatchewan, if it's really dry, but there's good habitat in other breeding areas, then that area that's really important for birds that are coming here eventually, the numbers could be down a little bit. And so that's one thing to note, is just looking into a little bit further in that report. And then as the season moves on a little bit, the brood rearing portion of the biological, the annual cycle is extremely important for the fall flight. Those breeding numbers come out, and those are adult birds that have made it through last hunting season. Those are the birds that are being counted and extremely important. I'm not trying to discount that at all, but they've got to have good wetland conditions, good, habitat conditions in general in the breeding grounds, so they can crank out that cohort of birds that are going to be new in the fall flight each year. And so that's extremely important as well as to, what's going to end up being the birds that we're going to be hunting here in Mississippi later in the winter.
Yeah, and then past that, those are all real important. I'd look real heavily more through that later part of the summer about what are those wetland conditions specifically to like Saskatchewan, and to see like what's their production going to be like. They're set up for good production. That's when I feel a little bit more at ease. But then past that, it's after we see if we're lucky enough that got good breeding pair numbers in the spring and good wetland conditions in those areas in the summer, and we hopefully will set ourselves up for success. But weather is really going to be the thing that makes or breaks our duck season. We saw that the very extreme and harshness of that last year, for sure. Because you can have a pretty abysmal bee pop or breeding population and have a really harsh winter. And
like that bee pop, way to go,
Yeah.
nerd.
Or you think you have BC like the little kid from The Simpsons. Every time we say something nerdy, he's like, ha ha, nerd. But so you can have a pretty abysmal bee pop, just at that level enough to where we still have a 60 day, 60 duck, still that type of framework. But pretty low overall compared to maybe say 2015 or some year when we really had a super high population. But if you had the right weather, you could have a way better season than having the highest bee pop on record and mild winter. So that weather is a huge,
especially
part of it.
the southern latitudes, right? Like bee pop's great, but the southern hunter's perception of a good season, I don't, y'all might have a better idea how many hunters are watching that BPOP number. I don't know. They probably see it on social media now or see the little chart. But yeah, like you said, if they don't get pushed down here, they're going to be as mad as hell or be largely unsatisfied, even though it may have been a great year for bird numbers. But, if you start charting this out, like as you guys are talking, not to throw another nerd term out there, but there's a hierarchy to this satisfaction thing, right? Like it starts, obviously, you got to have birds. But as you move down, this chart gets pretty damn complicated to get to what at least a southern latitude hunters. I don't know what those other guys are having to deal with. I assume they're just at the mercy of the weather like us, where a crazy winter blast could push their ducks out and they're done. Us kind of being towards the end of the trail, probably provides a little bit of safety there. But man, this gets complicated quick.
I've had that happen in Canada, where normally there's every duck in the world is there. It freezes solid for 3 days before you get there and they're just gone. I think that's a great point, Mark. But one thing that I always encourage the hunters, everything that the hunter says is anecdotal. You guys are talking science. We have a tendency to look at our 40, 100,000 acres and, judge the whole flyway on that one little area. That's really a mistake. Yeah. And what I say to sort of combat that is that we all have to decide as hunters, particularly waterfowlers, do you want there to be more ducks or do you want to kill more ducks? And that's the question. And I'm not implying that what your answer should be. I want there to be more ducks because then when it freezes for 3 days in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, I'm going to kill them in Mississippi. And it's as simple as that to me. I want there to be more ducks, even if I kill less ducks.
So that's a great point, BC, and I would agree with that. And going back to the breeding populations, of course, we want that number to be higher. We want it to continue to go back up and to get to where it used to be, and even higher than that. But like James said, there's so much more that we'll get into on this podcast about, even if that number's down, that the report that comes out and Mark asked the question, how many people are looking at it? We hear from a fair number of people who are looking at it because there's not much going on during the summertime, that's hunting related anyway. And they're kind of setting their expectation based on that big number, right? Is it down from last year? Oh, well, it's probably not going to be a good duck season then, right? And like James said, there's so much more that determines a Mississippi duck season or X state, you name it, what it's going to be like. That's going to impact that migration and how things
even your spot, like just
right.
We've all had experiences where the neighbor's killing ducks and you're not. Running my traps this week post Arkansas's opener, it seems like that where there are ducks, there's a bunch of ducks, and there's lots of places that don't have any ducks. So there's not that many ducks down. Hopefully this coming through tonight will help that, but there's not that many ducks down, and where they are, they're highly concentrated. So if you're not in one of those, if you were in one of those highly concentrated places, you'd think it's the greatest duck season ever. And a mile away, you may think it's the worst duck season ever. We got to encourage people to stop looking at it that way.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Cal. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, and may be about to say the same thing you were going to BC's point. We spent a lot of time on several other episodes talking about, just that landscape around people's properties and things like that, and how things can change over time, and people who have really good historical spots, they may see less and less bird use over the years, and it may not be as much relied to less and less ducks, but more about what the people around them are doing management-wise. Maybe you had a whole bunch of people flooding fields around you, and then as the years went on, those folks, maybe aged out of hunting, or their kids aren't coming back to the farm or whatever, and they just don't flood all those fields anymore, or what have you. The landscape changes as far as its attractiveness and capacity to hold birds, and so that impacts you who is still doing the management. And so I think we get, like you said earlier, we get focused in on our little slice of the world, and we think nothing's changed on our place, but there's so much stuff happening around us that we maybe aren't paying or some folks aren't paying attention to as much. Like I feel like our over in my area that we have had more habitat start showing up around us, and we're doing better than we were doing when I mean, we shoot more ducks now than we probably did when I was in high school or college. So it's gotten better for us. But to the same point, in some years under this few, especially early season, my neighbors can be killing the mess out of them, and I won't have anything, you know. And so that's another part to Houston's point of how many birds we have coming into the area, but that wetland availability too this time of year. It's only the people who can pump, usually, unless we get a lot of rain. October is usually the driest month of the year leading into the duck season. And so, so unless November changes dramatically and you get a lot of rain, it's just where whoever's been able to put water on the landscape, or you have places like Mossy or someplace that you got, it's semi-permanent water, you know, and you can maybe hold some birds on those, and other places that are maybe just a little bit of water here and there. Birds are going to concentrate where the best is, and there's not that many birds. You might be right next door, but you just may not have what you need right there at that point.
So if you feed all that in, everything everybody just said, you feed that into this ultimate flow chart, starting at the top at the biggest picture, what affects, let's just say, a southern latitude of Mississippi duck season, and you're narrowing this flow chart down to what y'all are just talking about, your property or your blind or whatever. And then if you take a step back, okay, the landscape around you all know that's important. It's interesting, being almost 40 and being duck hunting since I was 9 or 10. It's interesting now what hunters are talking about versus what I remember them talking about when I was a teenager, right? So we talk about Houston. You said like people are y'all are getting a lot of calls about the BPOP numbers because of the social media stuff. And now we're all having a conversation on a podcast about the landscape management, we're putting it all together more holistically. I don't know if 30, 40 years ago, the conversation was this nuanced.
It was,
right? It wasn't. Okay. So if it wasn't, that's pretty cool. So I know we all bitch and moan about, the dangers of social media because there's so much bad information out there, but it also seems like the duck hunters in general are probably more well-versed. And of course, there's some misinformation out there, but they've got a bigger arsenal in their tool belt to understand their duck season and why certain things are happening. When I was a kid, and I'm sure you guys all remember this, who did you blame when you had a bad season? It was one organization. And I can remember, Calicut, I told you this story. I can remember sitting in the Mississippi Delta and the last day of the season, and somebody asked what happened to our ducks, and the answer was DU. And it was just, let's just blame DU for everything, right? Now you don't hear near as much of that. There's still some of that out there.
Yeah.
Thank goodness you're not hearing near as much of that. But people are talking about the weather. They're talking about climate change. They're talking about how the landscape around you has changed, because now anybody can go to Google Earth and zoom around and hit the timeline button and look how much different the landscape has changed. So I think if you'd asked 40 years ago what makes a good duck season, you would have had a very reasonable answer from a sample of duck hunters. And if you ask now, I think it'd still be a very reasonable series of answers. But I bet it gets way more complicated. If it was a multiple choice, 40 years ago, you had to choose one. Now it'd be all the above, right? Because I think the hunters now realize there's way more to this than just the weather, just the BPOP, just the NGO efforts, just the state efforts. Houston, I'm sure you get blamed plenty for hell, I've cursed you several times in a till blind, but I think it's interesting that in the age of social media, how much more complicated the answer to the question we're posing today has gotten. And I think it's a good thing. It's just something I think that as managers and professionals, we've got to be more calculated in our messaging to make sure that the hunters know more than they used to, which is a good thing.
Showing my age a little bit, Mark, but in the early 90s, well, really the late 80s, when my dad and all of his buddies started getting involved with DU, obviously DU's been around forever, but it was because of those drastic drought numbers that happened in the late 80s and early 90s, and we're killing, it was 30 days and 3 ducks, and it scared people, and I think that's carried over into why people are more waterfowlers are more educated, because maybe they're not old enough, like I am, unfortunately, to remember it personally, but they've heard it from their dad, their grandfather, like, hey, this can all go away. Don't think it can't, because we saw it happen. I mean, if you go from 1985 to 1993, it was like a whole different thing. And I was there to see it. One of the things that happened in our area, and back to what you were talking about, James, is that in the 80s, when the catfish farming, exploded, all that ground used to be rice. And rice that with pretty inefficient harvesting practices. So we went from having all this wetlands all around us to catfish farms. And noticeable how many fewer migrating ducks within a few years were coming to that area. Then when they took all of those catfish ponds, not all, but many of the catfish ponds, and put them back into WRP, hey, shocker, we started seeing a lot more ducks. And you're exactly right about that, James. Like that, you can the individual waterfowler like me that's not a scientist can see those examples, in their own area, and you can kind of figure it out. I think that social media has been actually great, Mark. There's some incredible science that you can read every day, not just on ducks, but obviously we're all passionate about turkeys too, and some incredible information that, I didn't know any of that stuff 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think informing the hunters has helped for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with what Mark was saying about, we're dealing with a much more informed hunter, and, working for a state wildlife agency, it's really important to us to keep a tab on, what hunters think, what they want, because, we have to try to strike a balance between what's good for the resource and what's good for the resource users as well. And so, if there's situations that, are not of what we would say biological significance, then we need to be listening to, what the hunters want, and try to, maximize their participation, continue their participation, because we all know how conservation is funded. So it all plays into a kind of a larger and larger snowball. One thing that BC was talking about, with things changing on the landscape and all, that's one thing that we're constantly trying to continue the conversation with hunters about is, we all can kind of get the blinders on what we're doing, on the areas that we hunt on and all, but these are highly mobile birds, right? They're traveling thousands of miles, and settling into a landscape, not necessarily a wetland or two that they're going to be using for the remainder of the winter. So, things that are happening well outside what a landowner's control is in a lot of cases is really dictating how birds are using the landscape and all. And we're still learning about that, still want to learn more about that, how birds are interacting with the landscape and how does hunting pressure play into those movements. There's tons of work that's going into that, and it's a really hard thing to try to get your mind around, but it definitely plays into the whole habitat use and how ducks behave on the landscape.
Houston, I have a question. Has it made, and really this is for the whole group, has the general base of knowledge of the waterfowler being higher, has that made your job easier or harder? Because I know I'm asking you pointed questions every time we're hanging out that I wouldn't have even known to ask 20 years ago.
Yeah, man, that's a tough question, ironically, to answer, but I would say it makes it a little harder, right? Just because, there's the knowledge base is higher, but, and then like James said, there's a lot of things that people are reading that are maybe not really science-based or a lot of opinion. And so it's kind of hard to, you can't stay ahead of all of it, and you kind of just got to react to some of it as it comes. But we've had generally positive experiences with, it's always good to question things. there's a lot of disagreement even in the scientific community, and that's how science advances, right? We're just trying to troubleshoot uncertainty as we go along with a lot of this stuff. And so it's all good. We don't take it personally when people, disagree with us or challenge us on things, or we try not to at least. But it's hopefully all in the overall goal of moving forward with a better product and how we're analyzing things.
Yeah. Houston, I would agree with that. I think there's elements of where it makes it tougher, and I think from an extension standpoint, I find like a lot more of my job is fighting misinformation than, as much as it is about putting out information. So that makes added workload of having to try to keep up with, and that's the difficult part for me. Is somebody will ask me, well, I heard about this, and I haven't seen it yet. It hasn't hit my radar screen yet, and so I'm caught off guard with it, and then I have to go research that. But overall, I think it is a very positive thing. I'm glad that we have hunters that are that passionate and, are reading up. And as long as folks are open to, one, they understand how we are as scientists, and that, like you said, we're just trying to troubleshoot that uncertainty. There's some things we know and there's some things we don't know. And those things we don't know, we're working on figuring out how to figure those out. And as long as they know that, I think you can have a good conversation about, well, let's talk about what we know, and then let's see what conclusion we can come to that everybody can understand and see. But I think obviously our hunters are our most important stakeholder, and having been wearing the green shirt and working alongside you at the agency, that's one great thing about state wildlife agencies, is that if a decision's not, as you said, biologically significant, or it doesn't have a lot of biological impact to the resource, then you can do things that are better that the hunters want. And so that's like a lot of what happens at those flyway tech section meetings, revolving around regulations and seasons and all that sort of thing. I always try to, in waterfowl ecology, when we do that lab where we kind of tell the students how the flyway process works, kind of describe it as it's like the Congress for duck hunters. We're your representatives. And so if it's not negative to the resource, we want to do things that are positive for hunters and help them out. So all in all, I think it's great having a really informed stakeholder group. Like I said, it may make some challenges along the way, but I think it's a positive thing.
Yeah, good point, James. I mean, one thing that we all need to remember on both sides, on the the duck nerd side and the Joe Blow hunter like me, is that it needs to be a conversation. I think I see so often that people come in with their guns blazing, and they've already decided about, based on that 40 acres again, and that's not how it works, and it's not how we get things done. And I think we all need to remember to, hey, we want to have these conversations. Both sides want to have these conversations, but we've got to be open to the fact that we may be wrong or not have all the information. I love hanging out with all you guys because, I can ask questions and y'all know the answers. And actually, James, you oftentimes will say, I'm not sure, but I'll find out. And, we'll have a 2-hour conversation a week later about it. So that's it. That's the kind of thing that I think everyone is thirsty for. And back to Mark's point, I think that's why those social media platforms are so popular, because people do want to be informed.
Yeah, that's a big part of it is, the challenge, a big part of the challenge, I guess, and James and Mark know this more than I do, even, being in academia, is, we've got to have, when we're interacting, when we're giving information, we've got to, as best we can, be presenting the facts. And a lot of times those conversations are not really fact-based. And so it's a real challenge to try to stay in our lane and not speculate and get outside of what the science says. And so that just adds another layer of difficulty a lot of times. But yeah, you're right, BC. It's got to be a two-way conversation.
Yeah, but that's a good point too, Houston. You guys are, it's kind of like you have to tread lightly, because what you say to me, for example, and we're friends, but what you say to me, I take as gospel, because I know you're an expert. And so, and I've seen you not answer questions directly that I've asked you, and I could tell it's like he doesn't want to give me his opinion. He's trying to tell me a fact, and it's unclear what the fact is. That happens a lot. This stuff, it's not the back to the silver bullet, James. Like, it's not a silver bullet, and so I appreciate that about you, Houston. You're very diplomatic, and so I can always trust that whatever you do tell me is what is actually happening.
Well, somebody told me a long time ago, and I use this a lot, that a wildlife biologist's favorite response is, "It depends."
Yeah, when we had Hagee on, we tried to limit how many times he could say it because he was dealing with such a complicated topic, and it was really just to mess with him. But yeah, it could almost be a drinking game. Every time a biologist says it depends, you take a shot.
For that,
the more complicated the question, the more often it comes out, and that's good because you guys are making good points. None of this is rarely is the answer really straightforward or even that concrete. It's often so contextually dependent, right? And in the quote world, it's no different. There's so much context to it. So I think the just getting back to like hunter satisfaction, the best way for the natural resource community, the professionals, to communicate with the public on this topic or any topic is, as you said something about uncertainty. It's all, I tell people all the time, all science is trying to reduce uncertainty in decisions. That's really all we're doing. We're trying to knock out as much noise and control it through experimentation and research so we can understand what's really happening. And here's the kicker we don't always do, and then state our level of certainty about that thing. We don't do a lot of that. We need to do a better job saying, hey, this is what this management activity or action should do. Here's the degree of certainty I have in it. Here's the things that could affect my certainty that could make it not come out that way. And I think if we do a better job of that, we'll increase trust with the hunters and everything else, because the hunters are dealing with the same thing. They've got the same elements of uncertainty, but they might not always have some of the information we have, in the scientific community. So that's where we go back to what you said, BC, making sure it's a conversation, how many times I've been wrong in my career in front of the public? It's a lot, I hate to admit that, but I kind of don't, because that's part of it. A scientist or a biologist is not going to be right every time. And I think if, we're kind of getting more into how we communicate with the public here, but it's a good topic. And I think you're right. Addressing what we know, what we don't know, and the degree to which we don't know stuff is pretty important step that often gets overlooked.
Mark, I completely agree. And I'm sure we can talk about this topic for the next 6 hours, probably.
Yeah, but back to satisfaction.
Yeah, so you also mentioned hunter satisfaction in there. So let's switch gears into that. So like we said, good hunting season means a lot of different things, and satisfaction of your hunting season can be wildly different from one hunter to the next. Some are very harvest driven in their satisfaction. They shoot a limit of ducks. Most times trips they go out, that's a good duck season. And then for others, it may be something completely different. Maybe time spent with friends, family, or how many retrieves did my dog get, what have you. There's a whole slew of different things that make for a good duck season. And so I thought I'd we'd kind of go through a lot of those things for us individually, and maybe a little bit about how we came to waterfowl hunting and why we've kind of been captivated by this particular group of game birds. But maybe we can start with BC, because I always think the way BC came to duck hunting and the family-oriented aspect of it is like one of the coolest things in the world to me. And I certainly wish I had a similar experience growing up. But BC, I'll let you kind of take things off.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess on the how it started, that for me, there was never a beginning of my waterfowling life, because my mother and my mother hunts more days than my dad now, and they're in their 70s. So they hunted my whole life. And so there was never, from, literally a baby, I was there. Maybe not in the blind, but there just wasn't a beginning. So it's been a part of my life, and it's a huge part of, our connection as a family. As much as I love to give Houston a hard time, it's not that hard for us to open on Thanksgiving because we have Thanksgiving at the hunting camp anyway. So, the only thing it's going to keep us from doing is we don't get to watch as much of the parade unless we kill ducks early.
That's right.
So that's sort of my background. On the satisfaction of the season, I say if I had to have one thing like that was my measuring stick, being days of field. If I've been 30 plus for 26 straight years, but many of those were 50 plus. And there's a lot of those days I kill 0. But I'm just someone who likes to go duck hunting. And I like to kill ducks too. Please don't misunderstand me. That's a part of the satisfaction too. And I love to watch my dogs pick them up. But for me, I want to be exhausted on February 1st.
Well, yeah, and DC, that's a good point. I mean, obviously, we probably put the caveat across all of our answers to this question that yes, harvest is in there, but for some people that is the number one thing. But certainly, whatever our favorite or whatever about a duck season makes it good for us. So for you, it stays spent in the field. How many trips do you get to go out there and be in nature for a while and watch birds and all the things and just get away from everything else? That time spent out there is the main metric. It's obviously elevated if you kill some birds while you're doing it. And so
the time is what sharpens my axe, not the killing birds. And look, none of us are going to sit here and say it's not about killing ducks, because it is about killing ducks. But it's not just about killing ducks. And I've learned about myself that my axe is sharper for the whole year if I'm able to spend more time out there.
Completely agree. Houston, we can move over to you now.
Yeah, I guess going back to how I got my start, maybe a bit non-traditional. I didn't duck hunt at an early age. Growing up in the hills of Mississippi, started out dove, deer hunting, squirrel hunting, those types of things, and was certainly an avid hunter since I was, since before I was able to actually pull the trigger, going with my dad. And so certainly had a passion and a love for the outdoors. I was probably in junior high school when I started doing a little bit of duck hunting. And again, in the hills of Mississippi along the Big Black River. So wood duck hunting, beaver sloughs, things like that. I mean, it was we were high-fiving if we heard a mallard in the air, and it was, even better if we actually got a shot at one a lot of days. So that was the majority of my duck hunting early on. But as I started, to be able to go out and hunt on my own, driver's license things, started to venture out, and it kind of opened up the world a little bit more, getting out and hunting on some other places with some friends. But just thinking about hunter satisfaction, BC's right. I mean, we're going to be lying if we say, I don't care if I don't, pull the trigger or something like that, or kill a duck. But to me, just thinking about, if I had to just real quick come up with a duck hunting story, it's going to be more about the social aspects a lot of times, and even things that didn't go the way we planned for them to go a lot of times. So, James, I think about the time hunting with you when we set up on this spot and just things weren't going well, but we saw ducks going down on this spot that there wasn't even really a duck hole, right? It wasn't planned. It was just water that had flooded out on this, what we called a low spot in the field. But we had the mindfulness enough to pick up our stuff and go over there and move. And then we had a really great hunt after that. And it's just little things like, getting stuck, going to the duck hole, things like that, laughing at your buddy when he misses, the social aspect of duck hunting that you don't get with a lot of other hunting activities is a really big part of it, just getting out and enjoying it with family and friends.
That's a great point, Houston. And that's something I'd like to add too, is that you kind of reminded me of another thing that I think about as the season winds up is who did I get to go with? Obviously I want to go with my Miss Kim, my wife, and the kids, and I want to go with my parents. I want to go with my buddies and family. And like, if I get to the end of the season, I actually have a list on my phone called Duckers, and it's all the people that I want to take or I want to go with. If I get to the end of the season and I've spent time with most of those people, that's another measuring stick for me.
For sure. I think I'd agree with that. That'll be probably a lot of what I'll say about what I enjoy most about duck hunting, and I think that's increased for me recently. Mark, forgive me, I'm gonna make you go last.
You too.
Yeah. Well, but no, I very similar introduction to waterfowl hunting is Houston. I think I was probably 12 or 13, I guess, before I really got into duck hunting. My dad had grown up hunting quail in the Delta, and never really, amazingly, to have grown up in Tallahatchie County, never hunted ducks before. Still amazes me to this day. I can't. Just must be a testament to how good the quail hunting was at that time. So when he started practicing veterinary medicine and such, he just kind of became more of a fisherman, So I learned how to shoot from him and that sort of thing. But my uncle was really kind of started getting me into hunting, and started out hunting, just there in the hills, deer, squirrels, doves, that sort of thing. And then my uncle took me duck hunting for the first time. We went somewhere along the Tenn-Tom, one of the wildlife management areas up there, John Bell Williams or somewhere like that. And remember, I just had a pair of hip boots, and we waded in there and saw a bunch of wood ducks. I don't even think I fired my gun. We got lost on the way out because one of my uncles was staying, and the other one's like, y'all can go on and head towards the truck. And my other uncle had not been there, so got lost. Got back to the house, and my uncle was like, he's never going to want to go again. And for some reason, I don't know what it was particularly, but I had just a blast, and I was like, when are we going again? So I was stuck with it from that point, and got into going to Tallahatchie County to the family farm and expanding my duck hunting opportunities, and just fell in love with it. And it's why I pursued the career I did. So I'm just captivated by these birds more so than any other wildlife species. But for sure, spending time with friends, because that's what I remember. I obviously remember a lot of the elements of the good hunts where we harvested a lot of birds, but so much more of it has been the conversations and the time spent with friends and family, and the time at camp and all that sort of thing. That really, because I'm sure it would be hilarious if we had recordings of all the times Houston, you and Mark and I have been in a blind somewhere, especially, good
Like,
hunt or bad hunt from a harvest perspective. What's that?
I'm very glad there are no recordings.
Oh, yeah. It would be just lots of laughs and lots of good times. And certainly for me, I think I've gotten to where I treasure that meaningful time with the people I care about more than anything else, and getting to do that while doing an activity that I just absolutely love is just, that's it. That's what does it for me. And so I think that is really my major motivation. Obviously the dog work is great too. I think that before, I'd say leading up till the last like 5 or so years, I would say the dogs had become, I graduated on that journey to becoming a hunter, type thing. There's the stages. Some people stay at certain stages, some people move on, that sort of thing. I think I'd gotten to the point where it was all about my dog, and that was mostly what it was about. But I'd say now it's all, for me, mostly about time spent with you guys in the field and others and family, and just having a good time. Because if it wasn't for that, I would have had the worst duck season of my life last year. I think most of us would have. But I still had a blast every time I went out, because every time I went last year, which wasn't that many times, not as many as I'd like, but it was with good friends, and I just had a blast. And even with Mark, I had fun, which is, saying a lot.
He had to get that in there, didn't he?
Yep. Now we'll let you talk.
Oh yeah. Get all the good answers out of the way, and then leave it to me. Yeah. So it's interesting listening to y'all, because I agree with a lot of that. And of course, it's changed. The one thing that I don't value, I guess, as much as BC made a really articulate and poetic point about list of people he hunts with and how that's a factor. Man, I could not be any more opposite. I hate hunting with new people. I've got maybe 4 people on this planet I want to duck hunt with, and everybody else is like if because Calico, you and I have had a few where somebody you wanted to bring, and you're like, you gonna be okay with that? And I'm like, yeah, it's your friend. I'll tolerate it, because I don't have that many people I like to share a blind with. And once I've, some people just have terrible gun safety skills. And that's always been such a huge issue with me. So I have about maybe 4 or 5, if I stretch it, people on this planet that I want to duck hunt with in a year. And unfortunately, due to resources, Calicut's one of them. And but it comes down to that. But I will say, I get that everybody else does. I know I'm in the minority there. But I guess how I got started, my dad took me, and my first duck hunt was a terrible experience. It was iced over. It was in a bayou diluter in northeast Louisiana, and we were in these kind of fiberglass pirogues getting out there. We're trying to bust through the ice, and I'm trying to, bust through the ice with my hand, which has a glove. I think I was 10, maybe 11, and of course my hand's freezing cold. It was so cold I couldn't, even pull the trigger. I don't think we even saw a duck because there was so much ice out there. Maybe we did. Dad can refute it. I don't know. And then we got back, and I couldn't open the door to the truck because my fingers were so frozen. And I was like crying because I was so miserable. And he hates when I tell this story, but then my dad goes, well, I guess you're never going to go duck hunting again. And I was so pissed off that he said that, because I hadn't complained once. I just sat there crying and dealing with it, that I was like, you know what? Screw this guy. I'm going to keep going to duck hunt just to spite him. So I kind of got into it like that. But we had some good hunts together. And then in my early teenage years, my great uncle started guiding for a place in North Louisiana, and I got to go with him a lot. So my real kind of graduation into duck hunting, I was spoiled rotten. I had these pit blinds in Northeast Louisiana I had access to. My great uncle was a dog trainer. I had these amazing dogs. I've written stories about them in magazines. I mean, they were just phenomenal. So I got exposed to like this whole other world than what my first experience was. And at the time, James, one of y'all mentioned the stages of a hunter, and I can't remember all the stages, but they teach it in Hunter's Ed. But yeah, man, there was a while there. Bodies. I just wanted stacked up ducks. If I didn't shoot a limit, it was not a great day. And it really didn't take me that long to get out of that stage, because like you, James, I got into the dogs real quick. Like I said, I was hunting with these incredible retrievers, and I was like, okay, I want that. So I was trying to figure that out. But I didn't really get that till we were in grad school. We all started getting our own dogs and had a little time to train them. So I went from bodies, blaming DU, blaming everybody I could during my teenage years for the conspiracy theory that it was, to everyone trying to not let me kill a duck. Got into the wildlife program, realized what an idiot, how misinformed I'd been, and then got into the dogs real quick into grad school. And then nothing changed for a while. It was just dogs. Cal, think about it. In an average year in grad school, we hunted with what, 6 people, maybe? Mm-hmm. We had a real tight group. We all hunted together. And so I got used to that, got into the dogs, and then I had kids. And BC, this is where you and I probably, will agree. That changed everything, right? Yes. Getting my son the opportunity to shoot a duck means more to me than anything, right? And, and of course my dog's still a huge, huge high priority, but it's just right below maybe just a sliver. My kid having a good experience. But yeah, man, that dog, the main reason I go now, I've shot enough ducks in my life to be satisfied on killing ducks. I want to go. I want to have, like BC, I want to have the chance to get out there. I want my dog to have a good experience. I want my kid to have a good experience. And now that I often have kids when I go, I don't kill near as much. So the cooking parts become a higher importance for me, because it's usually, I'm not breast pointy ducks. It's more of like, okay, we killed 2. Let's whole pluck them and let's find some cool recipe we can do. So all that stuff is that stuff I didn't care about at all. I mean, all we did back in the day, Calicut, we'd wrap them in bacon, jalapeno, yeah. I can't remember the last time I did that with a duck I shot. So it's changed. And then on the dog thing, the last thing I'll say, it changes kind of where you're at with your dog. Like a mediocre season for an aging dog ain't that bad, because you might not want to put him through a 5-man limit, as they're getting older, or for the young puppy, you might not want just 40 mallards coming in and 6 guns going off with the young puppy. You might want to go out there and shoot a couple of wood ducks and a merganser here or there, and the occasional coot, just to make sure your dog gets a retrieve. So kind of where the dog stage has a lot to do with kind of how I view the season. When my dog was aging out, it didn't really matter to me if she picked up 1 or 2 versus 20. I just wanted her to be able to retrieve before I knew she was going to retire. Now with a younger dog, yeah, I mean, I want a lot more retrieves. So kind of where you're at in your dog's evolution and is also kind of a compounding factor in there.
For me too. As a matter of fact, tomorrow will be my new dog Preacher's first hunt.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's 9 months old, and it'll be all about Preacher and Ivy and making sure that they have a good experience, and very little about how many ducks we kill. Again, I like to kill lots of ducks, but tomorrow will be about those 2 guys getting, their sea legs under them. And another thing I thought was really interesting, Mark and Houston both brought up difficulties, and that being a part of like what makes a season satisfying is that the overcoming the challenges. And I think that is a common ground amongst waterfowlers. Like Mark, your story of, this is not going to whip me. Most of the time you find waterfowlers don't mind working, and they don't mind doing things that other outdoors pursuits would never dream of doing. They make fun of us. You're going to go stand in the water, in the ice, and rain, and all I think is, oh yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I agree with you guys as much as I don't know that it's my number one. That the challenge, and I've gotten to where one of my favorite things is to see how easy I can make it. So I work really hard, and our whole team works really hard all year long, so that 60 days is easier for everyone. Now and I get great satisfaction in like all of that work in August makes this day easier for everybody, particularly when I've got a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, 75-year-old mom and dad, and, they can't do what they used to be able to do and what all of us can do. So I have to make it easier too.
Yeah, and DC, that makes me think not only about just all the work you go through in duck hunting, whether that's preparing for the season, management and all that sort of thing, or things that you do during the season, but also too, not just like you're crazy for standing out in cold weather and stuff, but the lengths we'll go to during a hunt to kill birds, or the things we'll come up with, the crazy things we'll conjure up, like this is gonna work, like this is what we're gonna do, this is gonna work.
Our mutual friend Jacob Sarton, I give him such a hard time. I have never been on a duck hunt with the man where we didn't move the decoys 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
He's gonna get it dialed in.
There's always something to blame it on, for sure.
Yeah,
There is. Yeah, like I think we should move this, or I think it's because we're on this tree line or whatever it is. And
well, I went back to a yellow dog, and I can't wait for everybody to start.
Yeah.
Or they're like, oh, he's flaring on the dog. I'm like, yeah, sure. The dog and the guide are invisible.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, one thing that, we've hit on several times is, we certainly want to kill ducks, and that's what duck hunters are. That's what they want to do, on most of their hunts, or at least have some level of achievement there. But just looking back at, state duck stamp sales in Mississippi, they've been on an upward trend. We had record numbers the last few years. Last year, a little bit down, but it was still the second highest we had sold in history of the state duck stamp. So duck hunter numbers in Mississippi have been going up a little bit every year. And looking at just harvest averages from surveys that we do, HIP surveys, MDWFP does its own separate survey. We get very similar results that show that the average duck hunter, not BC doing 50 days a year, but the average duck hunter is going to hunt 9 or 10 days a year. the average harvest per season is going to be around 18 to 20 ducks per season. So I think a lot of things that we just talked about kind of apply across the board, right? I mean, there's not everybody's going out there shooting a limit of ducks most days that they hunt. And so there's other reasons that they're going out there and continuing to love the sport and to get into the sport and bring new people into it, right? I mean, it's just a lot of the things that we just mentioned, and probably a lot of things that we're not even thinking about as well. They're just bringing people back to it and making them enjoy it.
I recently read a survey that was done by Ducks Unlimited Houston and now this was nationwide, all of the flyways, that those people who identified as a duck hunter, so are you a duck hunter? Yes, I'm a duck hunter. The average days that that group spent afield was less than 3, like 2.8. And I thought that was really interesting. And that it speaks to how passionate we all can be about this. Now, this group is even more passionate, but you're talking about a guy who goes 2 or 3 days and I'm a duck hunter. And he is. But I think that speaks to what it does to you. I don't want to get off topic, but I cannot have this many duck nerds in one place and not ask you a question. I'm looking out my bay window, and for the first time this year, I'm seeing a huge flight of starlings. I know this weather's pushing through. Do the starlings come at the same time or before the ducks? Because I'm usually seeing starlings later in the year.
Yeah, that would be an I don't know for me as far as the timing of starlings.
I know, you got it right. It depends. It depends.
Sure, yeah, it depends on something. Sure. But yeah, I mean, this time of year, it's we all just kind of take it for granted and overlook it. But, these weather changes that we get just with migratory birds in general, I mean, I've gotten to be more of just kind of a backyard birder later in life, I guess, the last few years. And so I'm always in the morning looking at my bird feeder, especially this time of year. And then again in the spring, just seeing, what might have shown up overnight, and caught a north wind down here or something. So lots of species moving for sure with all these little weather changes. But no, I can't speak to the chronology of the starling migration.
Yeah, he's going to acknowledge duck nerds, and he asked about some damn passer.
Yeah, I can also, I'll be the same as Houston. I can't comment on starling migration, but I was talking to Schumer yesterday, Mike Schumer, that does the Foul Weather podcast, and we were talking about some other stuff, some things we were working on, but he was talking about this front coming through, and he was like, pretty sure it's going to end his season up in New York. Like, they're pretty well going to be done after this, because he said even though it'll freeze long enough to get the ice on there, and even if when it gets above freezing, he said he thought it's still a lot of ice is going to remain just because it's as thick as it'll get at that point. But so he said he thinks theirs is more or less kind of coming to a close, which sucks for him, but that's good for folks south of him.
It'll build some character for old Schumer.
Yeah, Mike needs those experiences. But so it was good news to me. I was like, oh man, I hate that for you, but man, that makes me feel a little better.
Yeah, we're due an easier season. Last year was challenging for sure.
So James, we kind of brought it back to weather a little bit, and so just thinking about some things that matter with weather. I think most duck hunters are aware that we need cold, harsh winter weather from the north. It's less about what the temperature feels like outside here in Mississippi to bring birds here. But one of the things that we don't talk about and think about a lot is just the duration, right? I mean, we can get a cold night, a cool north wind one day, but really that duration, that several, 3 to 4 is kind of what I have in my mind, days of sustained winter weather from the north. That's when we typically see those spikes, really, measurable increases in duck numbers and goose numbers showing up in Mississippi.
Yeah, and that's something that I think more hunters are getting aware of too, thinking about that duration, but then also to other factors like last year, they were, I had colleagues sending pictures of them killing mallard limits in January in North Dakota. You know, like, and even if, you know, so it's snowfall too in those, you know, in those latitudes where they field feed, you know, got to think about that too. It may have gotten freezing temperatures, and that all those other birds that don't field feed as much, well, it'll push them out. But if a mallard can find a place to have open water and then have accessible food in ag fields, you know, they'll stay there, you know. So it takes that snowfall covering up that food and the freezing temperatures, you know, freezing up wetlands, push those birds south. So, and then as you get down to our latitudes, you know, too, it's you know, completely about just duration. So like we need Cape Girardeau, like BC said, to freeze up. We need it to be frozen for several days, you know, to ensure that we're going to get birds in Arkansas and Mississippi and North Louisiana. And so, yeah, that just a little cold spell. I'm guilty of it too. I mean, we're, as BC says, duck nerds, and I'll still be like, get a little cool front, you know, and be like, oh yeah, it's gonna be good, and then have to think about it like, nah, it may not be that good, you know.
Well, and
certainly
nowadays, these weather fronts, you know, one of the more accurate predictions with some of the climate change models is the increase in volatility and kind of variability in weather patterns. So, I mean, how many times in Mississippi is it 20 degrees and then 56 2 days later, right? So I don't know, because I said I'm not in the duck world anymore, but do we even know how ducks respond to, hey, big front pushed you down, and then 3 days later it's 60 degrees where you was just frozen? You know, does that affect their propensity to move? It's going to get more complicated, and that's why all the research about people with all these new fancy GPS units and getting frequent locations, especially during major weather events, I think is going to be a huge component to understanding how this works. I know when I was doing ringneck duck research at UGA, we were tracking them on the way back. We were tracking them through spring migration after we had gone through the winter, and it was really impressive how they always stayed. We would pull the NOAA, snow cover map. It was really impressive how they would always stay just below the hard freeze line. Like you had to zoom in. Wait. How close are they to this thing? And then as soon as it thawed, bam, they exploited it. And of course that was just ringnecks on the way back up. It wasn't birds coming down. So, you know, they're probably making decisions for different reasons at that point, because they've got different agenda for the next few months. But that kind of stuff's going to be fascinating to learn as this continues.
Yeah, and I think that's
already
hopefully
learning that. I mean, I think there's already a lot of data that has showed that the ducks go back north. Like our freeze last year, that, you know, we had tons of ducks during that freeze. As soon as it thawed, I mean, they vanished, and everybody started killing them again north of us. I think you're right, Mark. I think they stay as far north as they only go as far south as they have to, or the mass of, I think that's for sure.
For sure. And I hope that, you know, we're going to start doing a little bit of some mallard transmitter work, and hopefully over 3, 4, 5 years, however long that we're tracking these birds, that I'm hoping that we will capture enough variation in that those winters, you know, that we can kind of get snapshots under each of these kind of conditions. What do these birds do? So last year was a kind of an interesting thing with that freeze. Right when that freeze happened too, though, it was right when we started getting a lot of rain afterwards, you know. And so a bunch of ducks down, and then it thaws, and then it's all this rain. You went from having no habitat on the landscape to tremendous amounts. So if we just had a certain amount, maybe some of them went north, but a lot of them probably just were spread out. And it'll be interesting to see too, like you said, like they get pushed down because of weather, but then the temperatures raise. It'll be interesting to see, you know, how much do they move around when those temperatures get to super high like that for winter temps. So just teasing out all those questions is going to be really interesting to do. And, you know, lots of other folks are doing that too. Folks in Arkansas, Doug Osborne, Ryan Askren, and Brad Cohen in Western Tennessee. And so hopefully with so many of us doing this, and then maybe we can kind of pull together a lot of that information and really see at a pretty broad scale answer a lot of these questions. As long as we just got so many other sources of data from weather and all that, that we can pull in to look at this stuff. So it's going to be really nerdy and really cool.
So James, I'll follow along that, talking about our, the data that we have and looking at it, and going back to last season. I certainly don't want another season like that because it was so dry and warm and relatively low numbers of ducks for the majority of the season. But because of our aerial waterfowl surveys that we, continue to collect data on, that last year was the best scenario that I have now to point back to say weather moves ducks, and we can show you with the data that we've got, right? Because it was just so low. And then we had a more than 4 times increase from early January to late January just because of the timing of that aerial survey there. And so, it just like you said, we're going to continue to learn the transmitters on, birds in Mississippi. It's going to tell us a lot just about, habitat conditions and weather conditions are still going to probably dictate what those birds do when they're here. But we're excited to learn, how they respond to whatever Mother Nature deals.
Oh, for sure. And I know we've got plans to kind of look at some of those other factors with things like y'all's aerial waterfowl surveys, but these transmitters are really going to be give us a lot more information like that. And so hopefully, not only will it tell us a lot more about as far as for management, but obviously that'd be interesting to hunters, knowing what birds do under certain conditions and that sort of thing, So it's cool research all around as far as the implications both to conservation and to our stakeholders as well. So I think it's going to be a cool study. But well, fellas, we've been going for like an hour now. I always know that it's been a fun episode when I just look down at that timer and it's like it's been an hour and 6 minutes. Like, okay, we probably should wrap up. I'm having fun, and I know we can carry this conversation way further. But maybe we'll get back again next year, just do a recap or something on this past season and talk through some things. But thank y'all so much. It's been good to have 3 of my closest friends here to have a conversation with this morning. And so
you are welcome.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. You most of all. But yeah, I hope everybody, like I said, this is probably going to come out right after that first weekend of duck season. So I hope everybody had a good opening weekend, hopefully from a harvest standpoint, but if not, enjoyable nonetheless. I'm sure we're going to have a good time one way or the other. But appreciate y'all taking time out of your mornings on the duck season eve to talk with us today. So appreciate y'all coming.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. Enjoyed it. I'm going to go load the truck and head to the camp.
Sounds good. See y'all later.
Thanks for joining us on Game Bird University Podcast. To keep up to date on when new episodes are dropped or for more information on game birds and their management, you can follow us on Instagram at MSUEXT_GameBird or follow us on Facebook at MSU Extension Game Bird Program.